Korean Mafia arrived home and finds his pregnant wife working as a maid while his mother and sister laughed. What he did next will shock you. The scrub brush slipped from Imani Freeman's trembling fingers and clattered against imported Italian marble. 6 months pregnant, on her knees in a maid's uniform she never asked to wear, she watched soapy water pool around her swollen ankles. Above her, laughter rang through the mansion's grand hallway like breaking glass. "Did I say you could stop?" The voice dripped with practiced cruelty. Imani's hand instinctively moved to her belly, protecting what mattered most. She reached for the brush again, her back screaming in protest, her dignity somewhere far beneath the surface of that filthy water. The other staff members walked past with their eyes down, pretending not to see. They'd learned that lesson weeks ago. What the women standing over her didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand in their bubble of assumed power, was that the man about to walk through the front door owned every breath in that room, every heartbeat, every consequence, and he was 3 minutes away. Imani hadn't always been the woman on her knees. That version of herself felt like a story from someone else's life now, distant and fading. She'd grown up in Chicago's South Side, raised by a grandmother who taught her that strength wasn't about never bending but about choosing when to stand. Her grandmother used to say that dignity lived in the spine, not the circumstances. Imani had believed that once. She'd met Taegon at an international business conference 2 years ago. He'd been standing alone near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and something about his stillness had drawn her across that crowded room. They'd talked for hours about philosophy, about power structures, about the weight of family expectations. He'd never lied about who he was or what his world demanded. She'd seen the danger in his eyes and chosen him anyway. Their marriage had been her decision, a conscious choice made with open eyes. She'd known about his connections, about the empire he controlled from the shadows, about the respect his name commanded across Seoul's underground networks. What she hadn't known was how his family would see her. Foreign, different, unwelcome. "You're getting water on the baseboards now." Taegon's sister, Young, circled Imani like a predator studying wounded prey. She was 28, unmarried, and deeply bitter about both facts. "My brother may have married you, but that doesn't make you family. Not really. Not where it counts." Imani bit the inside of her cheek and scrubbed harder. "Respect is earned through patience," she reminded herself. It was the mantra that had kept her silent through 3 months of escalating cruelty. 3 months of being treated like an unwanted guest in her own home. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The pregnancy had changed everything. Before, there'd been cold politeness, subtle exclusions from family dinners, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. But the moment Taegon's mother learned about the baby, something shifted. The mask came off. The real war began. Madame Y stood in the doorway of the sitting room now, watching with the detached interest of someone observing a laboratory experiment. She was 63, elegant in the way of old money and older grudges. Her late husband had built an empire, and she'd spent 30 years protecting it from anyone she deemed unworthy. That category included anyone without the right bloodline, the right connections, the right shade of skin. "The floors in the West Wing need attention too," Madame Y said, not to Imani directly but to the air above her head, as if speaking to servants required a different elevation of speech. "Before my son returns, he shouldn't have to see this mess, as if Imani's existence was something to be cleaned up and hidden away. Young laughed, high and sharp. "Mother, do you think she even knows how to clean properly? Look at those streaks. Then she'll learn." Madame Y's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Tradition demands discipline. She wants to be part of this family. She needs to understand what that means. Our ways, our standards." They'd framed it all as education, cultural immersion, a way for Imani to earn her place. But there was no curriculum here, no path to acceptance. Just endless tasks designed to break her spirit, wrapped in the language of tradition and duty. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Beck, appeared at the edge of the hallway. She was 50, efficient, and wore permanent exhaustion like a second skin. Her eyes met Imani's for half a second, and something flickered there. Sympathy? Warning? It vanished before Imani could be sure. Madam, why? Mrs. Beck said carefully. The kitchen staff needs direction for tonight's dinner preparation. Tell them to wait. Madam, why didn't look away from Imani? I'm supervising something more important. Character building. Imani's knees had gone numb 20 minutes ago. The baby kicked. A flutter of movement that reminded her why she endured this. Why she hadn't called Taegon, hadn't complained, hadn't shattered the fragile peace he believed existed in his home. He was building something bigger than both of them, securing their future, making sure their child would inherit safety and power. The least she could do was handle his family. Except handling them meant disappearing piece by piece. The woman who'd argued philosophy over wine, who'd built a career in international development, who'd once believed her voice mattered, that woman was drowning in bucket water and forced humility. My son is too soft with you, Madam Y continued, her tone almost philosophical now. He thinks Western ideas about marriage mean something here. Partnership, equality, these are fantasies. In this house there is order, structure. You're carrying a Y air which gives you value. But value and respect are different things entirely. Wayung crouched down, getting close enough that Imani could smell her expensive perfume. Do you know what the other families say about you? About my brother's choice? They laugh. They think he's lost his edge, married some foreign woman because she made him feel modern or progressive or whatever delusion he's suffering from. You're an embarrassment. The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Imani felt each one land like a physical blow. But she kept scrubbing, kept her face neutral, kept the tears locked somewhere deep where they couldn't be weaponized against her. The thing is, Wayung continued, standing back up, Taegon doesn't actually see you. Not really. He sees his decision, his choice, his judgment. Admitting you were a mistake would mean admitting he was wrong, and my brother doesn't make mistakes. So you're safe from him, maybe, but you're not safe from us. Madam Y nodded approvingly at her daughter's assessment. He's busy building the future. We're maintaining the present. He'll thank us eventually, when he realizes what we've saved him from. They believed it too. That was the terrifying part. This wasn't malice for malice's sake. In their minds, they were protecting the family, upholding tradition, correcting Taegon's one moment of weakness. They'd convinced themselves this cruelty was love. Across the city, in a private room above a restaurant that didn't appear on any map, Taegon sat across from three men who controlled most of Seoul's commercial real estate. The conversation had been productive. Deals had been made. Territory had been negotiated without a single raised voice or implied threat. That was Taegon's signature. He didn't need to threaten. His reputation did that work for him. Your father would be proud, one of the men said, raising his glass. You've expanded the family's influence beyond what any of us thought possible. Taegon accepted the compliment with a slight nod. He was 34, and he'd spent the last decade perfecting the art of controlled power. Never act on anger, only on certainty. That was the rule that had kept him alive, kept him ahead, kept him in control when lesser men fell apart. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Nothing urgent, just a routine update. But something about the timing felt off. Taegon had learned to trust those instincts, the ones that whispered warnings in languages logic couldn't speak. Gentlemen, he said, standing smoothly, I need to handle something at home. We'll finalize the contracts tomorrow. There was no argument. When Taegon said he needed to leave, people simply stepped aside. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Back at the mansion, Imani had been moved to the second-floor hallway. More marble. More floors that didn't actually need cleaning but provided excellent theater for humiliation. Her uniform was soaked through now, clinging uncomfortably to her belly. She'd asked once, 3 weeks ago, if she could at least wear her own clothes while doing these tasks. Wayung had laughed and said that servants wore uniforms. It was only appropriate. Two of the housekeeping staff, young women named Sua and Eunji, worked at the far end of the hallway. They'd been kind to Imani before all this started, had taught her basic Korean phrases, had shared tea during breaks. Now they kept their distance, self-preservation overriding compassion. Imani didn't blame them. She understood the math of powerlessness. I heard she tried to order the chef around last week. Wayang was saying to her mother, loud enough for everyone to hear. Demanded special meals for her pregnancy cravings. As if our kitchen staff exists to serve her whims. Imani had asked, politely, if there was any fresh fruit available. The chef had been happy to help. Wayang had rewritten the interaction into evidence of arrogance. She doesn't understand her place yet, Madam Y replied. But she will. We have months still before the child arrives. Plenty of time for proper education. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Imani paused, hand pressed to her side. These moments were private treasures. Reminders that something pure existed separate from all this ugliness. Her child. Taegon's child. Worth protecting at any cost. Are you resting? Wayang's voice cut through the moment. I don't remember giving you permission to rest. The baby, Imani started. The baby will be fine. Women have been working through pregnancy for thousands of years. Or is this another Western weakness we're supposed to accommodate? Madam Y checked her watch. Taegon won't be home for hours still. He has meetings until late. We have time to cover the entire second floor, I think. And then perhaps the stairs. Yes, the stairs would be good practice. All that bending and reaching. Very character building. They were escalating. Each day pushed a little further than the last, testing boundaries that kept expanding. Imani wondered sometimes where the line was, what final humiliation would satisfy them. Or if satisfaction was even the goal. Maybe the cruelty was the point. An endless loop of proving and reproving her unworthiness. The front door opened 2 floors below. Footsteps in the foyer, calm and measured. Taegon's security chief, Lee Sang-woo, speaking in low tones. And then a voice that made Imani's entire body go rigid with conflicting emotions. Where is everyone? Taegon. Home early. Home now. Madam Y and Wayang exchanged a quick glance, surprise flickering across their faces before practiced composure slid back into place. They'd grown comfortable in Taegon's absence. In the space his busy schedule provided for their private war. His unexpected return was an unwelcome variable. Second floor, dear. Madam Y called down, her voice suddenly warm, maternal. We're just overseeing some household matters. Nothing important. Footsteps on the stairs. Not rushed. Never rushed. Taegon didn't hurry. The world waited for him. Imani wanted to stand up, to hide the uniform, to somehow erase the scene he was about to witness. But her body wouldn't cooperate. Exhaustion and pregnancy and accumulated shame pinning her to the marble floor like a specimen under glass. Taegon appeared at the top of the stairs and stopped. His face was unreadable. A mask perfected over decades of negotiations and power plays. Dark eyes moved from his mother to his sister to the scrub brush in Imani's hand to the bucket of dirty water to the uniform that hung loose in some places and tight in others, accommodating her changing body. He didn't speak, didn't react, just watched. The silence stretched. Seconds became years. Taegon. Madame Y moved first, gliding toward her son with practiced grace. You're home early. We weren't expecting you until much later. Clearly. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Wayang recovered next, straightening her shoulders. We were just helping Imani learn proper household management. She's been so curious about our traditions, about how things work. We thought hands-on experience would be valuable. It was impressive, really, how quickly they'd constructed the lie. How easily they'd reframed abuse as education, cruelty as kindness. They'd had practice, Imani realized. This wasn't improvisation. They'd prepared for this possibility, however remote they'd believed it to be. Taegon's eyes found Imani's. She saw calculation there, assessment, but nothing that looked like anger or surprise or even concern. Her heart sank. Maybe Wayang had been right. Maybe he didn't actually see her. Maybe all he saw was his own judgment, his own choice, something he needed to defend rather than protect. I see. 2 words, carrying no inflection. He walked past all of them, past Imani still kneeling, past the bucket and the brush and the evidence of 3 months of systematic degradation. Mother, a word in the study. Wayang, you should join us. Madam Y smiled, victorious. Of course, dear. As they moved toward the stairs, Taegon paused. Imani. She looked up, hope and fear warring in her chest. You should rest. Mrs. Beck will help you to our room. That was it. No questions. No confrontation. No rescue. Just a polite dismissal. As if he'd found her reading a book or having tea. Something mundane and unremarkable. Imani felt something crack inside her chest. Something that had been holding on desperately and had finally run out of strength. Mrs. Beck materialized at her elbow, helping her stand. Imani's legs shook, not trusting her weight. The housekeeper's grip was firm, steadying, and when Imani glanced at her face, she saw something there. Not quite pity. More like recognition. The look of someone who'd seen this play before and knew how it ended. Behind them, Madame Y's voice floated down the hallway, already confident again. Such a sensitive time, pregnancy. The hormones make them emotional, irrational. I'm sure she's confused about what's happening, what's being asked of her. We're just trying to help. The study door closed, cutting off the rest. Mrs. Beck helped Imani to the master suite, a sprawling set of rooms on the third floor that Imani had barely occupied in weeks. She'd been sleeping in a guest room, told by Madame Y that Taegon preferred his space when working late. Another lie, probably. Another way to separate and isolate. Shower? Mrs. Beck said quietly, the first word she'd spoken directly to Imani in days. Change. I'll bring tea. Imani wanted to thank her but couldn't find her voice. She nodded instead and disappeared into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Only then, standing under water hot enough to hurt, did she let herself cry. Silent sobs that shook her whole body, washing down the drain with soap and sweat, and the last remnants of her hope that Taegon would fix this. He'd seen. He'd walked away. That truth was somehow worse than all the rest. In the study, Taegon stood by the window overlooking the garden. His mother and sister sat on the leather couch, comfortable, relaxed. They'd done nothing wrong. Their body language insisted. They were the victims here, misunderstood and unfairly questioned. The girl is manipulative, Madame Y began. I know you care for her, but she's been causing problems with the staff, making demands, acting entitled. We've been trying to help her understand. Stop. One word. Quiet. Absolute. Madame Y stopped. Taegon didn't turn around. I'm going to ask you both a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you believe I'm stupid? Of course not, Hwa-young said quickly. Taegon, we would never. Then don't insult my intelligence with lies. He turned now, and something in his eyes made both women straighten. I've been watching, listening. The staff talks. The drivers talk. The security team talks. And they talk to me. The color drained from Madame Y's face. You thought I was too busy, too distracted, too caught up in business to notice what was happening in my own home. That was your first mistake. Taegon moved to his desk, picking up a remote. He pressed a button, and the wall panel slid back, revealing 3 monitors. Security footage. Multiple angles. Days and days of it, time-stamped and organized. Imani on her knees. Hwa-young's cruel laughter. Madame Y's calculated direction. All of it captured in perfect high definition. Your second mistake, Taegon continued, his voice still eerily calm, was forgetting that everything in this house belongs to me, including the cameras, including the staff, including every consequence that follows from every action taken under this roof. If you're still watching, drop a comment below telling us what you think happens next. And make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Madame Y stood, attempting to regain some authority. You're overreacting. Yes, we've been firm with her, but she needed guidance. She's carrying the family heir. We were ensuring she understood the weight of that responsibility. By making her scrub floors? By dressing her like a servant? By humiliating her while she's carrying my child. The calm cracked, just slightly, just enough to let something dangerous leak through. You didn't do this for the family. You did this because you're angry I didn't marry who you chose. You did this because she's different, and you can't control her the way you control everyone else. Hwa-young tried next. Brother, please. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. In a few days, you'll see that we were only trying to. I see perfectly. Taegon cut her off. I see 2 people who believed they could undermine my authority, disrespect my wife, and endanger my child without consequences. I see 2 people who forgot a very important rule. He paused, letting the silence build. I don't act on anger. I act on certainty. And I am certain about what happens next. Over the following days, Taegon moved through his home like a ghost, watching, documenting, speaking to staff members one by one in private conversations that carried the weight of confession. The young housekeepers, Suah and Eunji, cried as they described what they'd witnessed, apologized for their silence. Mrs. Beck provided dates, times, specific incidents that painted a pattern of abuse spanning months. The chef revealed that Madame Y had forbidden him from making anything special for Imani, had instructed him to tell her she was being demanding whenever she asked about dietary needs. The driver mentioned overhearing Wai Young on the phone, bragging to friends about putting the American in her place. Taegon listened to all of it, compiled all of it, said nothing. He visited Imani each evening, bringing dinner to their suite, sitting with her while she ate. The first night, she'd barely looked at him, the hurt too fresh, but he didn't push, didn't demand forgiveness or explanation, just sat there, present, letting the silence speak for him. On the third night, she finally broke. Why didn't you say something? The question came out raw, unfiltered. When you saw me there, why didn't you react? Taegon set down his tea. Get angry? Make a scene they could manipulate and dismiss as overprotection or excessive emotion. Yes, any of that. Something. Because anger makes mistakes. Anger acts first and regrets later. And I don't make mistakes with the things that matter. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close. I needed to know everything. Not just what I walked in on, but how deep it went, how long it had been happening, who knew and who participated. So you were investigating. While I was... She couldn't finish. While you were being hurt by my family. Yes. The admission cost him something. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. That's the part I'll carry. Not the time it took to gather information, but the time you suffered while I did. Imani pulled her hand back. Your mother thinks you married beneath you. Your sister thinks I'm an embarrassment. And you needed proof before you believed me. No. His voice sharpened. I never needed proof to believe you. I needed proof to act. There's a difference. In my world, accusations without evidence are just words. Words can be dismissed, explained away, turned around. But evidence? Evidence is power. And I'm about to use all of it. He pulled out a folder, slid it across to her. Financial records, bank statements, credit accounts. While you were being told you weren't worthy of this family, my mother was redirecting household funds to her personal accounts. Thousands, tens of thousands. Money meant for staff salaries, for estate maintenance, for your medical care. She's been stealing from her own grandchild. Imani stared at the numbers, her mind struggling to process. Wai Young has been using the family name to secure loans she has no intention of repaying. She's been threatening business partners, claiming my backing when I've given her nothing. She's created liabilities that could have exposed us all. So this isn't about me. Imani's voice went flat. This is about money, about business risks. This is about a pattern of behavior that includes both. Taegon leaned forward. They hurt you because they thought they could. They stole because they thought I was too busy to notice. They've been operating under the assumption that my love for them, my sense of family duty, would override everything else. They were wrong. He stood, moved to the window. I built this life to protect the people I love. To give our child a world where they're safe, where they have choices, where they never have to bend to someone else's cruelty. But I can't build that world if I allow that cruelty to exist in my own home. What are you going to do? Taegon didn't answer directly. Tomorrow, my mother has lunch scheduled with her social circle. 20 women from the most influential families in Seoul. She's been planning it for weeks. I know. She mentioned I wasn't invited. She also won't be attending. Before Imani could ask what he meant, Taegon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, nodded once, and looked back at her. The question isn't what I'm going to do. The question is what you want. This is your life too. Your child. Your home. You get a say in how this ends. Imani sat with that, turning it over. Power after months of powerlessness felt foreign, uncomfortable, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. I want them to understand what they did was wrong. I want them to feel it. But I don't want violence. Taegon supplied. That's not my way. Never has been. Then what? Consequences. Natural, proportional, permanent consequences. The next morning, Madame Y woke to discover her credit cards declined. Every single one. Her bank accounts frozen. Her access to the family estate revoked. The invitations to her carefully planned social lunch mysteriously cancelled by someone claiming to be her assistant. She stormed to Taegon's study, fury overriding caution. What have you done? He was at his desk signing documents. I've corrected an oversight. You've been living off the family resources for 30 years. I've decided that arrangement no longer serves anyone's interests. I'm your mother, and you've been stealing from your grandson, abusing your daughter-in-law, undermining my authority. He looked up, expression neutral. The trust fund my father left you will provide a comfortable living. But the supplemental money, the estate access, the use of the family name for personal gain, that stops today. You can't. I can. I have. It's done. Madame Y's face cycled through emotions too fast to track. Shock, rage, calculation, fear. The family will hear about this. The others will question your judgment. They'll say you've been manipulated by that woman. They'll say whatever you convince them to say. But you'll notice something interesting when you try. Taegon returned to his documents. Your friends? They've stopped taking your calls. Your influence in their circles? Vanished overnight. Turns out respect built on proximity to power disappears when that power withdraws its support. He'd been thorough. Calls made to every influential family. Conversations held in private rooms. Information shared about financial mismanagement and liability risks. He hadn't needed to threaten. Simply letting people know that Madame Y no longer represented his interests had been enough. In their world, association was currency, and hers had just been devalued to nothing. Young appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Taegon, my accounts are now your sole responsibility. No more family backing for your loans. No more using our name for credit. You wanted independence, wanted to prove you didn't need me? Congratulations. You're independent. This is insane. Over some misunderstanding with your wife? Some bruised ego? No. Taegon stood now, and something in his movement made them both step back. This is about a very simple principle. You challenged my judgment. You disrespected my choice. You endangered what I've been building. In my world, there are consequences for that. The only reason you're still standing in this house instead of dealing with much worse is because Imani asked me to be merciful. The words landed like a physical blow. Both women turned to see Imani standing in the hallway, no longer in a maid's uniform but in clothing that fit, that belonged to her, that announced her place in this family without apology. She asked you? Madame Y's voice cracked. After everything She wants mercy? She wants you to understand what you did, Taegon corrected. And she wants you to change. I'm less optimistic about that second part, but I'm willing to honor her request. He moved to stand beside Imani, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture both protective and possessive. From this moment forward, my wife runs this household. All household decisions go through her. All staff report to her. You want to live here? You follow her rules. Young laughed, sharp and bitter. You expect us to answer to her? I expect you to leave if you can't. Taegon's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. But understand this, you leave with nothing but what's legally yours. No family support, no connections, no protection. In this city, that's the same as leaving with nothing at all. The silence that followed carried the weight of recalculation. Madame Y and Young faced a choice they'd never imagined having to make. Pride versus survival. Ego versus reality. Imani stepped forward, and both women instinctively moved back. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that muscle memory hadn't caught up yet. I don't want revenge, Imani said quietly. I don't want to become you, to spend my energy on cruelty and control. But I do want respect. I want safety for my child. And I want peace in my home. She looked at Madame Y. You can stay. There's room here, and despite everything, your family. But the version of you that needs to break me to feel powerful? She can't exist here anymore. Then to Wai Young. You're angry about your life, about your choices, about paths not taken. I understand that, but you can't make me smaller to make yourself feel bigger. It doesn't work that way. Wai Young's eyes filled with tears, anger and shame mixing into something complicated and painful. You think you've won. No one won. That's the point. Imani's hand moved to her belly. This baby is going to grow up in a house where power doesn't mean cruelty, where strength doesn't require victims, where family is more than bloodlines and traditions. Whether you're part of that is your choice. Over the following weeks, the house transformed. Small changes at first. Staff members standing straighter, speaking more freely. The oppressive silence that had defined meals lifting into actual conversation. Madame Wai mostly kept to her rooms, venturing out less and less, her influence and presence shrinking to match her actual authority. Wai Young surprised everyone by staying. Not with grace exactly, but with a kind of grudging acceptance that looked almost like growth. She started therapy, started examining patterns she'd inherited without question. The bitterness didn't disappear overnight, but it began to shift into something more like grief for the person she'd let herself become. Taegon watched it all with the same careful observation he brought to business deals. He didn't trust the change yet, but he allowed space for it. Trust would be earned or it wouldn't. Time would tell. 3 months later, Imani stood in the same hallway where she'd once scrubbed floors. But now she stood tall, her pregnancy visible and proud, reviewing plans with Mrs. Beck for the nursery. The older woman had become an unexpected ally, sharing stories of her own struggles in the house, offering wisdom earned through decades of careful survival. The painter will be here tomorrow, Mrs. Beck said, checking her tablet. And the furniture arrives next week. Perfect. Thank you. Imani smiled, genuine warmth that the housekeeper returned. Taegon found her there an hour later, sitting on the floor with paint samples spread around her, debating between 2 nearly identical shades of cream. This is what you're worried about? He settled beside her, picking up one of the samples. They're the same color. They're not. This one has warm undertones. This one's cooler. Ah, critical distinction. She elbowed him gently, and he caught her hand, holding it. These moments had become their language. Small touches that rebuilt trust brick by brick. It wasn't perfect. Some days she still flinched when she heard footsteps behind her. Some nights she woke from dreams where she was back on her knees, invisible and powerless. But Taegon was patient. He'd waited years to build his empire. He could wait as long as necessary to rebuild her sense of safety. I saw your mother today, Imani said. In the garden. She was reading. Did she speak to you? She said good morning, asked how I was feeling. Progress. Or performance. Hard to tell. Taegon considered. Does it matter? If the performance becomes consistent enough, it becomes reality. That's a very businesslike way to think about family. I'm a businesslike person, but his hand tightened on hers. What matters is that you feel safe, that our child grows up in a home without fear. If my mother and sister can contribute to that, they stay. If they can't, they don't. The equation is simple. Imani leaned against his shoulder. Nothing about this is simple. No, he agreed. But we're figuring it out. The baby arrived in early spring. A healthy girl with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. The birth brought unexpected shifts. Madame Wai, holding her granddaughter for the first time, wept in a way that looked suspiciously like regret. Wai Young, watching from the doorway, seemed to see something in that tiny face that cracked through her remaining armor. She's beautiful, Wai Young whispered. Imani, exhausted and radiant, nodded. She's perfect. Later, when everyone had left and it was just the 3 of them, Taegon sat beside Imani's hospital bed with their daughter sleeping in his arms. He looked simultaneously terrified and complete, like a man holding the entire universe and knowing exactly how fragile it was. I'm going to teach her everything, he said quietly. About power, about control, about how to move through a dangerous world. I'm going to teach her mercy, Imani replied. About knowing when to fight and when to forgive. About building instead of destroying. She'll be unstoppable. She'll be kind. She'll be both. Taegon looked at Imani. Like her mother. Imani's eyes filled. I wasn't kind. I was just trying to survive. You were kind when you didn't have to be. When every instinct screamed for revenge, you chose something better. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. The hospital room held them in its quiet bubble, insulated from the world that waited outside. Tomorrow they'd return to the mansion, to the ongoing work of building a family from the wreckage of the old one. Tomorrow there would be challenges and setbacks and moments that tested every decision they'd made. But tonight, in this moment, there was just the three of them. A family defined not by bloodlines or traditions or anyone's expectations, but by the choice they made every day to show up, to try, to build something better than what came before. 6 months later, Amani stood in the mansion's main hallway during a gathering of Taegon's associates. She wore confidence now like a second skin, moving through conversations with the ease of someone who'd earned her place rather than been granted it. Their daughter, Zara, was upstairs sleeping, guarded by security that would die before letting harm approach her. Madame Y attended the gathering, quieter now, her influence restricted but her presence tolerated. She'd apologized eventually, a stiff, formal thing that carried more pride than genuine remorse, but Amani had accepted it. Not because it was enough, but because waiting for enough would have meant waiting forever. Wayung had moved out, gotten her own apartment, started a job that had nothing to do with the family name. She visited sometimes, awkward and trying, bringing gifts for Zara that seemed like peace offerings wrapped in pretty paper. "Your wife is impressive," one of Taegon's associates said, watching Amani navigate a conversation with three of Seoul's most influential businesswomen. "She's changed the energy here. She has." Taegon agreed, pride evident in his voice. "I heard there was some difficulty with your family." "There was. It's been addressed." The man nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. In their world, problems got addressed. Permanently. That Taegon had chosen a different path, had restructured rather than destroyed, had allowed redemption rather than demanded removal, that spoke to a different kind of strength. Before the guests left, make sure you hit that like button if this story moved you, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about love, power, and family. Drop a comment telling us what lesson you're taking away from Imani's journey. That night, after everyone had gone and the house had returned to its peaceful quiet, Taegon found Imani in Zara's nursery. Their daughter slept peacefully, tiny fists curled near her face, completely unaware of the legacy she'd been born into or the battles fought to make her world safer. "She'll never know how close we came to breaking," Imani said softly. "Maybe that's the point. We fought so she doesn't have to." Imani turned to him. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? All the complications I brought?" Taegon considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. "I regret that my family hurt you. I regret that I didn't see it sooner, didn't protect you better. But choosing you? That's the only decision I've never questioned. Not once. Even when it cost you? It didn't cost me. It revealed what was always there beneath the surface. Family that valued control over connection. Traditions that masked cruelty. I didn't lose anything worth keeping." He pulled her close, both of them watching their daughter sleep. "What we're building here, it's not perfect. My mother still struggles with letting go of the past. My sister still fights her own demons. But we're moving forward. That's what matters. And if they backslide, if the old patterns resurface, then we deal with it, together, with the same combination that worked before, your mercy and my certainty, your hope and my boundaries." He kissed her forehead. "We're a good team." Imani smiled. "We really are." As they stood there in the soft glow of the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of everything they'd built and everything they'd overcome, Imani felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not just safety, though that was there. Not just love, though that wrapped around her like a blanket. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you survived the worst and came out stronger. The kind that comes from standing tall after being forced to kneel. The kind that comes from choosing mercy without sacrificing justice. From building a future that honored who you were rather than who others demanded you become. Their daughter stirred, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. She would grow up in this house, but she would grow up free. Free to choose her own path. Free to define her own strength. Free to be both kind and powerful, gentle and fierce. Everything her parents had fought to become. And that freedom, that possibility, That future they were building brick by careful brick. That was worth every battle, every tear, every moment of darkness they'd walked through to get here. The house stood silent around them. No longer a place of hidden cruelty and forced submission. No longer a battlefield where dignity went to die. Just a home. Imperfect. Complicated. Real. And finally, blessedly, theirs.